Well, it's like, this is a side to Worms which like the public had never seen before. And so, I mean, most people, they thought of Worms as pretty boring, just live in the ground, eat soil. And there's this whole thing going on underneath with them. And so this is just bringing to light, making the public aware of what really goes on.
It's still the little game I'd made for me and my mates to play. I knew it was going to be popular. Never in my wildest dreams did I think it would be as popular as it was.
What is Worms? Oh, Worms is a terrible thing you pick up if you don't keep yourself clean.
Worms is a simple but kind of genius idea for a video game that was extremely addictive, and it was a huge amount of fun for a huge amount of people in the 90s and 2000s all over the world.
Worms is a video game where you build a little team of little animated wormy guys. And you have all kinds of cool weapons at your disposal.
Oh, no!
And you fight against another team on this landscape. When the worms move, they go, and it's fantastic.
It was a great fun game. Everyone was playing it. The bosses, all the QA. There was a few other companies that were doing games for Team 17 that were working in-house, and they'd be playing it as well.
Nobody was going home at the end of the day. We were all coming in on a Saturday and Sunday and running our own tournaments. Whenever anybody says to me, when do you truly know that you've got something special in development? That's when you know.
It's a game that has the perfect balance of friendly humor, but also a little bit like how should I put it? It's competitive, and you can be just the right amount of an asshole to your friends.
My memorable moves in Worms all involve dying in really spectacular ways. I've never been a great video game player. I love video games, love them. I always play them on the very easiest setting, sometimes known as Please Don't Hurt Me, Mama, or narrative mode. But there is no narrative mode in Worms. It's just kill or be killed.
Yeah, a losing person can still save the day. They can still come back. You don't get much rage quitting in Worms because, if you've only got one worm left and they've got 4, you can still win.
You can learn how to play Worms really, really quickly and then have fun with it.
The thing is, there are obviously countless amounts of classics, but so many of them just don't hold up anymore. It's an old game, but it still plays well, and it's good fun. It's very easy for people to get into.
There's lots in the games. I spent an awful long time balancing it and refining it. It's great to be still here talking about it.
Ow! What are you, nuts?
I'd always been a fan of artillery games, just the physics, and people obviously know you have your angle and your velocity and then the wind.
The early PCs that came out, I remember playing Gorillas, which was a game where you're a gorilla standing on the top of the building throwing bananas, I believe, at another gorilla on another building, and you just chose the angle, and I can't even remember if you chose the force. I think you just sort of chose the angle.
I'd always been a fan of them, and then one time, very, very bored doing A-level maths, one of my friends challenged me to see if I could make a game on this graphics calculator. And so I instantly thought an artillery game. So it had a very rudimentary programming language, but just enough to be able to create a random landscape, choose your angle, choose your power. But the thing that really struck me, I really like the idea of randomly generating landscapes. That just really, really appealed to me. So obviously there's not much you could do on the resolution of a calculator. So then I started on one on the Amiga. And with the Amiga, obviously, could do an awful lot more, much more complicated landscapes. And that's when the game started evolving. And that was back in 1990. Mum always tells me the first time I saw an Amiga, I was with her in a computer shop, quite young. And she always says she remembers the expression on my face, just like in awe of just what the Amiga could do. It felt like a computer from the future. When I first ported it to the Amiga, one of the first things I did was made the tanks move around, because artillery games are usually very static, very stationary. You have your set position, and it's then just a case of trial and error. Whereas making the move around, suddenly that opened up more strategy in the game. The game it became sort of a challenge to myself, like how deep can I make an artillery game? How much strategy can I introduce into it? So I think the game grew around what the Amiga's capabilities were. Like, instead of having a static screen, I had a scrolling screen, which with hardware scrolling, I could do really, really easily on the Amiga. And that let me have a wider playing field. And then one of my friends actually challenged me, say, well, can you get the graphics out of Lemmings? And I was a huge fan of Lemmings. And so I thought, well, let's have a look and let's see what we can do. And it did actually manage to pull the sprites out of Lemmings. And so as a laugh, I just swapped the tanks over to Lemmings. And we had little Lemmings running around. And that's when a little light bulb went off in my head, because suddenly there was a lot of humour in the game then, and a lot more movement. And again, this increased the depth of what you could do, the amount of strategy and things like that. So I needed small characters. So I decided on Worms and started a complete rewrite under the name Total Wormage. One of the first weapons which I was really chuffed with was the dynamite. Moving away from tanks, it just caused you to think more like, oh, obviously I could have a stick of dynamite and I could put that down and then I could run away and then it would go off. That version of the game ended up banned from school. I'd basically taken over a corner of the art room and people were skipping lessons to come and play this game. They never really thought about getting it published, but once it got banned, I thought that anything that gets banned, there's usually something good in it. All I wanted to do was try and get my game published. So I told my form teacher, I'm not going to go to university, I'm going to try and get my game published. And their last words to me were, Andy, you're good, you're not that good. And that was like, I thought I was then determined to prove him wrong.
Oh dear.
I was working in a computer shop during the day, staying up all night writing the game. Now bring in the latest version, and the people who came in the shop would play test it for me. And I remember one time a kid was playing it, and then his dad sat down and they started playing it as well. And they were there for a good few hours. And I was really chuffed at that. He managed to create a game that appealed across generations. And this coincided with a competition being run in Amiga format for a new language called Blitz Basic 2. And that seemed perfect for what I was doing. I literally worked myself to death to rewrite the entire game. At the same time, it wasn't just a rewrite because all these new ideas were coming at the same time. So the game was about 80% done when I entered into the competition. But the competition did not go well at all. Didn't hear anything. And then months later, just flicking through the magazine, and there's like a little paragraph of the results. And there was no mention of Total Wormage at all. But I was quite gutted. I was almost at the point, I didn't want to give up yet. So the next thing was to go to the trade show in London.
There's an event in London, you know, it used to, not anymore, but ECTS, and we had a stand at these events all the time, and we built our own stands.
But it was at the point where this was my last shot. You know, I felt I had something that was worth playing, you know, just because the people in the shop were playing it, I was still enjoying it. So I closed up the computer shop for the day, just stuck a notice on the door saying, sorry, back tomorrow. Had 2 discs with Total Wormage written on the labels.
And this kid walked up to the stand. Can't remember whether he was 16 or 17 at the time, you know, but I can tell you he looked about 14. He approached and said, I've got a game, I'd like you to take a look at it.
Team 17 were always top of my list of the companies I wanted to go to because they're very Amiga orientated, and this was a very Amiga orientated game. I thought they were the best fit for the game.
I think the name says it all, and Team 17 is really simple, right? They thought it was one bit better than the rest. It was a 16-bit era. It was 17. We were one bit better. It was games that were being made by gamers. It was games that were being made by people that basically wanted to do things a little bit different from everybody else.
So I walked up to their stand and Martin Brown was there. And so I said, hello, will you have a look at my game, please? And he went, sure. And so it's like, oh, right, we're off. So I set it loading on their Amiga there.
Everybody's talking about PlayStation potentially come in and everything else, and games are taking a step up. And this game looks like nothing like what everybody is expecting the market to be creating.
Gave a brief demo of it, and he just said, "Do you want the game published?" And I went, "Yes, that would be very nice." And so he said, "Come up to Team 17 in Wakefield next week, and we'll sort contracts out."
So we were playing a build in the evening, and Martin was raving about the game, and we're all talking about it around this table. And Martin lost the phone number. I think, if I'm correct, he reached out to Marcus Dyson, who was at Amiga Format at that time, because Worms had been submitted for a competition. And it didn't win. It still amazes me to this day that it didn't win. And we managed to get Andy's details from Amiga Format, you know, which is crazy when you think about it. Because actually, otherwise, we would never have ever been involved in Worms, right?
I was utterly convinced this was a wind-up. Like, I was not 100% sure this was actually happening, and I was still worried I'd get up there. You know, this is a very elaborate joke, and I get up there in a week's time, and it would be, "No, sorry, we're only kidding." When I went up there, and I took up the latest version of the game, and everybody in the company just sort of stopped and ended up playing it. And it got to the point where wherever there was a Amiga and a monitor, there'd be total wormage on it. That was an amazing feeling, because, you know, these are people who make games, who have seen lots and lots of games, and the fact they're choosing to play mine was amazing. And that's when it started to sink in that, yeah, they're serious. Obviously, Total Wormage was a parody of Total Carnage, the arcade game, and even the logo was a parody of it. So early on, it was like that was to reference another game. That was a no-go. It's I think the legal department said, "No, you're not going to do Total Wormage," and so the obvious name then was Worms. The Amiga then, especially Commodore, had already gone bankrupt in '94, so the Amiga market was like not as strong as it was either. So I think it's very clear that this had to go onto like lots of platforms. That was really cool for me, because the more people that get to play my game, you know, the better. You know, I as I say, I always wanted this to appeal to as many people as possible. So contracts were signed, and as I say, the game was about 80% done. So I spent the next year polishing and finishing the Amiga version, and Team 17 handled the ports to PlayStation, PC, and everything else.
The hardest work I think any of us have done it in our life. You know, Andy worked on the Amiga version, and we built a team that were going to take the game from Blitz Basic and put it into C++, right? And their job was to bring it onto 10 platforms for a simultaneous launch.
It was written around the Amiga's custom chipset with the hardware scrolling, hardware sprites and everything. And obviously that wouldn't fly on the PC. So the PC version became basically the base. And they started again, did a really, really nice engine for it. And they'd have an Amiga set up, and so they'd be playing it. And I was still finishing it. Like, I still had to put the extra 20% in to get and polish up the game. That did frustrate people occasionally. The exploding sheet went in quite late, so which was that was one of my favourite additions to the game. And I was away in Bournemouth finishing it, and I went back up north and said, like, "You've got to put this in the game." I did get into trouble occasionally for adding things when I should have been just content with what it was. But it's like once you get into developing a game, it consumes you basically. I was adding things right up until the last minute.
Martin said, you know, as much as we adore the gameplay of it, it really needed a bit of artistic love. So he said, please come on board and see if you can give it a little bit of a makeover. And again, I love a challenge like that. It's one of those things that was always going to be rewarding. You knew it was good before you even started, so all I had to do was make it look a little bit better than it was. And everybody knows what programmer graphics are like, so it was an easy win for me, that one.
I don't know who did the voices for Worms early on. Whoever, it was probably a dev, you know, it was probably somebody in the developer's office, and they were just like, hey, we need some voices for these worms. Who's gonna, Joe, you've got a funny voice. Come on over here.
The voices of the worms in the very first Worms game was mostly Andy Davidson, the creator. He and I sat together in my room and recorded those voices. So he would say something like, "Take this," and then I would speed it up, and it would sound like what you hear in the game.
Leave me alone. Bye, bye.
I mean, there were simple lines, but like I said, it was the whole vibe of the dialogue in Worms, of the voice acting and everything was very 80s blockbuster action movie kind of thing. You know, the one-liners you can get out of those. So, you know, you didn't have to be a great voice actor to provide, I'll be back kind of thing for a worm.
But then we had all the in-game music that I also spent quite a lot of time and effort on. And this in-game music, I deliberately tried to make it not so melodic or not so theme-like, but more like ambient background music that you shouldn't notice so much. So no strong melody lines, no really massive big audio or anything like that. It's kind of more sparse, transparent, and not so attention grabbing, because I realize people may sit and listen to this for hours and hours and hours and hours.
We'd been publishing our own content for 5 years at that point on home computers, but we hadn't done consoles before. We knew that we could bring the game to market on Amiga. We knew that we could probably bring it to market on PC. But bear in mind, this is a physical world at that time, right? This is console costs of goods. Forget making a game. The cost of goods are the things that stop developers doing a lot of things. And so we needed to find a partner for it. So Ocean were close on our doorstep. They'd also been phenomenal in the 80s and early 90s, you know, and we knew that to really do what we needed to do, we needed to spend a lot of time, not just with them on the game, on the development of the game and what we're making, but actually launching the game, because launching is a whole nother world.
I was expecting something more sort of a cult game, which I've been really proud of. You know, some of my favourite films are cult films. So if I could have created a cult game, that would have been amazing. But the fact it went then much more mainstream, obviously it got to number 1 in the all formats chart. And we also, at the ECTS, it won 3 awards. It won BBC Live and Kicking's Game of the Year and Most Original Game, because this was the year PlayStation launched as well. For a defiantly 2D game to win awards at that time, that was really special.
I always think of Worms as probably one of the first indie mainstream breakout hits. It completely changed our lives overnight. We went from, you know, working on so many different games to our life was completely consumed by Worms.
I wanted very much to give the Amiga a unique version, the best version I could of the game as a thank you. The Amiga slogan was only Amiga makes it possible, and in my case, that was definitely true. So I wanted to work on the AGA chipset was the newer Amigas, which had more graphics capabilities. So originally I started work on a version of the game which would look a bit better. But then it became clear that then there was a lot to talk about Worms 2 then and where we go next. For me, it was very important that Worms 2 would introduce a lot of new ideas, new weapons and everything. So Worms Director's Cut, which was the AGA version for the Amiga, that then became a prototype of Worms 2, which let me explore new ideas and new weapons. So the use of the ninja rope in the air, that was in that. Super Sheep, the Concrete Donkey, obviously, that's made its debut in Worms Director's Cut. Well, I say when I was very, very young, I did actually think my parents had poured concrete over a real donkey. And so I did actually try to find out if it was a real donkey, sort of chipping away a bit of it with a stone, but never found any first, so had to conclude that it was a genuine concrete donkey. So I thought it was only right to immortalise it in the game. It was the most powerful weapon, and it is basically a huge concrete donkey, falls out of the sky, and then it bounces as it goes through the level, eventually disappearing into the water.
Well, the ninja rope evolved. If you look at Worms 1, when you shoot the ninja rope and you swing around, the actual rope goes through the land, doesn't touch the land. So it would just swing completely through land masses. In Worms 2 onwards, we had it so the rope would curl around the land if it touched it, which made the way you use the rope a lot different because you get a lot of that springboard.
It was an interesting area of physics to play around with, just the movement of the rope. And on the Amiga 1, the rope would bend round, and it was a fun thing to develop. But then when making Director's Cut, it just hit me, what if I could fire the rope in the air? And if you could fire the rope in the air, then you could repeatedly swing across the level.
The previous Worms, the graphics have been very small, and now for Worms 2, they'd made it more cartoon. Very talented artist, Danny Cartwright, drew the worms. He created the newer design of the worms, which we've kind of gone on with since then.
So we shifted in style in Worms 2. He did some amazing animations, and that brought out the humour of it.
There's been an evolution of it, but you can see it hasn't deviated that much from the big-eyed worm. Whereas in the days of Worms 1, the worm had a flight jacket and a big nose. And I don't know how it came about that they removed the nose, but the nose completely went, it just still worked. Obviously, we wanted to do a sequel. It was going to be called Wormageddon. Wormageddon was going to be the battle to end all Worms battles. We changed the name to Worms Armageddon.
Worms Armageddon was called Armageddon because it was meant to be the last Worms game ever. It was going to be a trilogy, and that was going to be the last one.
The original one was sort of done with dialogue boxes and limited graphics. So this had to be fully graphical, which is, it's just easier to look at. Then we need to look at the single player. That's where Worms has always been a lot weaker. So we created effectively a campaign, pre-drawn levels that look really, really nice, that you'd have an objective. I went in to have a chat with Carl Morton, who was the programmer, and we were discussing how the game didn't have a sort of feature weapon. It's a showpiece. And at the time, the movie Armageddon was on at the cinema. And that's a whole load of meteorites coming to hit the Earth. And so we had a discussion about it and thought, there's something there that we could do something with. Now, my idea was lots of small meteorites ending up with one massive one that destroys nearly all the land. Fortunately, Carl Morton is a damn sight more clever and sensible than me and realised, the first part works really well, but a big meteorite at the end, that gives you no chance of survival. So he scrapped that bit, and we ended up with one of the most fun weapons to use because you really are not safe yourself. This is a last hurrah. This is a last attempt to survive and hope and luck.
Worms 2, we worked with Micropros because it was PC only. Micropros were the biggest in PC. But Worms Armageddon, it was a big labour of love, but it was painful. A lot of people don't see the other side of it. The game was PC was a year late. Micropros had been acquired by Hasbro. So we'd seen our publisher being acquired and all that turmoil that brings. And it needed to get back on console as well.
Because this was 7-8 years now I've been working on the game. And so I decided after that to have a bit of a break. When we went on to Worms Armageddon, I was happy to sort of hand the game off then. And basically, after 7-8 years, that's when I just wanted to sort of step back and just enjoy the royalties for a bit.
Okay, my top 3 Worms weapons.
Ooh. That's quite difficult.
Well, that's easy.
My favourite weapons, I'd say Super Sheep, Holy Hand Grenade, and the Concrete Donkey. And for very different reasons.
one of my favorites, and I can't remember exactly how it works, but it's so funny and wonderful. It was the sheep. The sheep! You release this sheep that then explodes. If you release it wrong, you get yourself in trouble.
The sheep, just because it's so goddamn erratic. I mean, half the time you're blowing yourself up more than anything else.
But it was just so much fun seeing what that sheep would do. And it baws, it goes, "Bah," and runs around, and then blows up.
It's a hell of a boon if it actually goes right for you.
The sheep was my favourite thing to put in the game. And so then to take us up to the next level, to turn it into a super sheep, was the natural evolution of it. You have the people who tunnel underground, the ones who hide worms, and super sheep was very good at hunting down those hidden worms. And because of the direct control nature, you rotate left and you rotate right. That's a very, very useful weapon and just generally quite entertaining. The Holy Hand Grenade, which obviously homage to Monty Python, which I think people may notice there is quite a Python-esque sense of humour in the game. And the Holy Hand Grenade, being a 3-second, incredibly powerful weapon, made perfect sense to put into it.
I mean, good God, that thing is brilliant. It's hilarious.
I was really pleased about the Hallelujah chorus before it goes off. When I came up with that idea and I put it in, and it never ceases to crack people up.
Yeah, pull the pin, listen to the angels and hope.
I loved Airstrike because you'd call in an airstrike and you'd pick the location that you wanted it to go into, and then a plane would fly overhead and it would drop a series of bombs. If you hit them right, they'd bounce, go wing, and then if they bounce more, and sometimes they fall off cliffs and into water. And
now the mine strike, you pick an area on the land, a plane flies across the top of the screen and drops a row of about 5 mines. Usually you'll get a bunch of mines near each other, so if one of them explodes, it will knock all the others into the air and they might land on somebody else. It's one of these weapons where you get some great chain effects.
There's nothing more satisfying than just demolishing half the level with a concrete donkey.
A huge concrete donkey falls out of the sky and just bangs away at anything below it. It's just one of the most ridiculous weapons you can possibly think of, which is why everybody loved it.
I think I'm gonna go with a classic weapon, quite a weapon that we used all the time. It's basically just a grenade.
Chew on this.
It would bounce on the landscape.
Oh no!
And I just always found that so satisfying to see the grenade go in a trajectory that you tried to calculate. Somehow there was more respect in taking out a guy with a simple grenade than with some huge super weapon.
Prod's definitely one of the top 3. It's not the most devastating, but it's the most humiliating to get killed by.
Right.
The prod. Definitely the prod. The most satisfying weapon to use, because you would just walk up to another worm and just...
All it does is nudges them a little bit. But if that's all it takes to knock someone off a cliff into the water and take their worm out of the game, then that's a lovely way of doing it.
I find more satisfaction in doing things with a, with a little knife than with a huge atomic bomb.
When the first one came out, everyone was going, 3D, how many polygons can you get on screen? So it was a very different thing. So a lot of people said, the obvious thing for the sequel was to stick it in 3D. And that's the one thing I didn't want to do with it, was there's no point just putting a game in 3D for the sake of it.
Originally, I can remember saying there will never be a 3D Worms game.
Worms Armageddon was a labour of love. A year later than what it was supposed to be. It took its toll on the company. I think, at that time, we were running out of money. We spent so much money as well. And so we were struggling financially.
Well, we wanted to do Worms 3.
When Worms launched, we moved from a publisher-developer to a developer. You're then in a different world. And there was always a lot of pressure on 2D games, especially where everybody was talking about 3D games and everything else that was coming. Whenever we were pitching a game to anybody, it's like, what about Worms 3D?
It was one of those things that was deemed as a necessity. 3D was the future. Obviously, everybody knew that. But Worms essentially was very much a 2D game, and it was hard for people to conceive of it.
It seemed a natural progression, but Worms is a game where you destroy the landscape. So we needed to create a 3D game where you could destroy the landscape. That's not trivial, especially not back then with the power of computers back then. Worms is making tunnels. It's floating bits of land in the air. So we tried to recreate that. We had some very good programmers who worked out a way of doing this fairly fast. So we did eventually get Worms 3D being actually something viable we could do. It was a bit later we sort of discovered the big flaw with Worms 3D.
The game is so intrinsically a 2D game in terms of how it gauging your weapons, the chain reactions that happen.
We were before our time in many ways on that particular game, because people weren't used to playing in 3D, and it's much harder to gauge a trajectory of a thrown item.
Obviously, you've got 360 directions that, say, a bouncing grenade can go. Whereas in the 2D game, it can kind of go left or right and down hills. So it nearly always end up going towards or away from a worm. Well, when you're in 3D, if you miss, that grenade has many, many more areas it can go to that aren't entertaining, that there's nothing there.
That's enough to break the guts!
Lobbing a grenade, you're never 100% sure where that damn thing's going to go. And that was quite a leap for most players to get over that one.
Have you even held a sword before?
While you'll be able to recreate some of that in 3D, you're never going to be able to create all of it. Just in the same way, just one worm being knocked into another worm, a very key part of Worms, is not very likely to happen in 3D.
A fair amount of work got put in to make when something bounced, to see could it adjust the angle a little bit to move it more towards another worm. It was very hard to get the game working in such a way that you'd get these happy accidents, because there's so many more places an object could go that wouldn't be near anything else and would just be boring. And that's one of the most important things, is that there should be a entertaining facet to it.
Valkyrie shall take your sling!
It seems like an odd thing to say in this day and age, but you've got to remember that 3D was incredibly new, and people were having a hard enough time navigating moving 3D in a screen without being nauseous back then.
You're in 3D, you've got the whole problem of how do you find where the other worms are. In a 2D one, you just scroll the map sideways. In a 3D one, they could be in a tunnel somewhere that you're not going to be able to see because you don't have some side-on, slice of the view. So it made it harder to target other worms. It made it harder to judge distance.
In my heart, Worms will always be 2D, and I think it works best as a 2D game.
But having said that, I will defend that 100%. I genuinely think it was one of the best versions of Worms. It was really, really good fun once you got used to it, but it was quite a steep learning curve, and I can understand that.
If a game's good, if a game's enjoyable, if a game's fun, whether it's 3D versus 2D, things like this, so at the end of the day, that's what matters. It's one of the best things in the world to have created something, and then coming up for 30 years later, that people are still discovering it or still playing it, or there's new versions of the game coming out.
I think that Worms continues to resonate with people after being out there on the video game scene for so long, for over 2 decades.
It's just got that right balance of fun, competitive, casual, but also kind of deep. Yeah, for me, that's the perfect game.
It's just good, clean fun. You know, there's no agenda with it. You're playing these little fictional characters. You're blowing each other up. They're cute. They make funny little sounds. They die in funny little ways. You know, and I'm sure that there are people out there who get hugely competitive about it. I never really did. I just really enjoyed the gameplay.
You just didn't have the angst that you now get with a lot of games. A lot of competitive games, people take it a lot more seriously. And it's hard to take a Worms game seriously when they're calling out revenge and saying your shot was boring, and it sort of takes the edge off it. You're allowed to feel okay about losing.
My son started playing, and he discovered it, I think 2 years ago, 9 years old. And for this generation of kids to be able to pick up a game that old and still think it's fun, there's not many games that can do that, and Worms is one of those.
A lot of people, even in senior levels in the games industry, you know, the amount of people who stop me, whether it's events or whether it's in meetings, and say, I grew up playing Worms, right? I was playing at university, you ruined it. You know, my degree was so bad because I was playing at night, playing Worms, LAN parties. The last time I was at Gamescom, it was one of the government officials from, like, the German government who came up and were being introduced to me. And I was like, hi. And they're like, Worms totally killed my final year. This is people's childhoods who have grown up and been inspired and are making games in our industry. Worms probably was the first mass market, mainstream indie game that was made by a bedroom programmer.
The UK software industry was born out of people creating games in their bedroom. And it's a really, you know, rather than big companies involved, it was small groups, small publishers.
I grew up in quite a poor upbringing, and so consoles weren't really a thing when we had 8-bit. You know, a Spectrum was, I think at the time, probably £100 to purchase, right? Every household could, even those who didn't have money, could have them.
My first computer was something called a Microtan 65, and you had to build it yourself. You had to solder all the components onto the board. It had like 1.5K of memory and a graphical resolution of a massive 64 by 64 pixels.
It was an interactive experience. It wasn't just a game playing experience. You were changing, and you know, I know it's not technically modding, but you were modding around and playing.
As soon as I saw a computer and realised you could make something move on the screen. Back then it was like magic when I was a kid. And the openness of the development on the Amiga was perfect for it. Like every computer was a dev kit. I just feel very lucky that I grew up when I did, for essentially what was the birth of the UK video game industry, through home computers, through bedroom coders.
You know, it's all about gameplay. Everything is about gameplay. And I still say, wherever this industry goes and whatever it does, the most important thing is gameplay.
When it was just a game for me and my friends to play, when we should have been doing schoolwork, and when people were skipping lessons to play it, and when it eventually got banned from school, the main thing I wanted to create was a game that didn't become repetitive, that didn't get boring. Because the aim wasn't to create a game that was published. The aim was to create a game that we'd never get sick of playing. One of the nicest things is that I've never actually got sick of the game. So I imagine like any author or director or musician or whatever can get sick of the things they created. But I can honestly, hand on heart, say I've never got sick of my game.
I would never change that experience, not for anything on the planet, because I think truly in your lifetime, if you have the privilege to work on a franchise or an IP that has achieved what Worms has done, you know, it's a legacy in the games industry. It's one of those games that people will be talking about in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, forever.
Alien Breed was my baby. Who knows that one? It was #1 in the charts for a year, and yet nobody says, are you the guy that did Alien Breed? No, it's always Worms. Always Worms.
I'm pleased that not only Worms has kept its audience, but I'm pleased that it's finding new audiences all the time. For the little game made for me and my mates, it still blows my mind.